Hello, this is Daniel McNamara coming at you with another Students of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast. It's been a while. I know the last time I was on this channel, I was doing the Epic Collection podcast for Avengers. I do plan to start that back up again, just looking to take a little break from the routine and bring you guys another new segment here, a new podcast to talk about. This is going to be hopefully shorter than usual. We'll see how long it goes for. But today is the first episode of a new series that hopefully some of my fellow students of S.H.I.E.L.D. may be participating in as we go along. It's called My Favorite Issues, episode number 1. And this would be, for this issue, or this podcast, I decided to go with my homeboy Iron Man. And I'll be talking today about Iron Man Volume 1, issue number 182. And the title of it is called Deliverance. And just some stats for you guys real quick. This was published in May of 1984, so mid-80s. Honestly, probably one of the hottest, most popular moments of Iron Man's history. Coming off about maybe, I want to say maybe 50-some issues after Demon in a Bottle. So we'll get into all that stuff as we go along, but just to go over, I guess, the format of these podcasts. These are all just going to be breaking down one issue. As we go along, there may be some where we might have to talk about one or two issues as they tie into each other, but this is really just like a very in-depth focus on just one issue and its story and its impact on the character and the comic industry as a whole. I'm certain that many of the people who are in our group will definitely find some good issues to highlight and provide a little spotlight and some emphasis on the issue's impact, not only on its character in the story, but just in general on the comic industry. So I'll just be breaking it down. I'll go through the plot. I'll explain to you guys how how to get it if you're looking into buying the issue to have or to read it, or all that fancy stuff. Also, I'll provide some context as to where this issue lies within the history of the character. So we'll get into that a little bit. I won't go into too much depth about it, but it's exciting. So we'll see. So Iron Man number 182, Deliverance, May of 1984. I guess the first thing I want to comment about is that the artist or the writer is Dennis O'Neil. Denny O'Neil, if you want to call him that. He's the writer. Luke McDonnell is the artist. Honestly, before I move into Denny O'Neil, Luke McDonnell, I think he might have been like on and off again with Denny O'Neil's, run on Iron Man. I don't think he was a stable. Sorry, I dropped my speaker. That's what's great about podcast. Anything can freaking happen. All right. So I don't know if Luke McDonnell was like a stable artist for the time, but anyway, he was the artist, and he did a pretty good job. I mean, this book really needed some pretty good art to communicate some of the messages he was trying to send. So I'll get into that as we go along. But Denny O'Neil, he's a legendary writer for Marvel in the 80s. And I'm assuming he probably did some work in the 70s and 90s as well. I honestly don't know a lot about him. I'm pretty sure he's probably done some really famous runs on other characters. I'm a noob when it comes to stuff like that. I'm still fairly new to comics. So, but honestly, Denny O'Neil's run is probably one of my favorite Iron Man runs ever. Obviously you have McElhaney and Layton's runs, both in the early 80s and the late and directly following Denny O'Neil's run, you have their second run at Iron Man, which was Armor Wars, Prologue, Armor Wars, the actual event, and a bunch of filler stuff. But Denny O'Neil's run really sticks out to me in a lot of different ways, and I'll touch briefly on it before I get into the actual plot of this issue. But some of the major highlights of his run included introducing Obadiah Stane, who would go on to be a really slow burn in the life of Tony Stark, and in the end it was very rewarding, as I'll get to later. He also gave Rhodey the Iron Man suit in issue number 170. So this is, just 12 issues after that whole event. So, um, and Rhodey would go on to have that identity until I think issue 190 something, like 196, 197, I think. So, a pretty long time for having Iron Man to be someone else besides Tony. And thinking back then, like in the '80s, like that was, I mean, not I'm saying it's a thing of the times, but like it was pretty risky to go remove your legacy character of Tony as Iron Man and put someone totally new into the mix. And Rhodey really gave it his own stamp on the character, and that's something that I'll probably touch on in another one of these podcasts or later on about Rhodey's impact on the character as Iron Man. So, um, and just the final thing before I move on is, you know, Denny O'Neil's run culminates in the Ironmonger storyline, which is probably, which is easily one of my top 5 favorite Iron Man stories. And you can check that video out on our channel. It's the video is going to be Iron Man Volume 1 top 5 storylines, so you can see where that ranks at, and get a little bit more in depth thing about that. But that's just honestly that whole storyline is this culmination of his run, and it's very rewarding. And this issue, Iron Man number 182, just fits right in the middle of it, and is really like the fulcrum on which Denny O'Neil's run really lies on, and where it starts to shift towards the ultimate climax with Obadiah Stane and Tony. So a little bit of information on how to get this issue if you're looking into actually reading it. You can always read it online. We use an online source. You can also get it on Marvel.com. I think it's like $2 to buy. You can use Marvel Unlimited. You can read it online that way. I actually found it. Fun story. I actually found it at PhillyCon this past year, 2017 PhillyCon. With my friends, we were looking through a bunch of long boxes, and I came across a big pile of Iron Man books, and a lot of them were really cool. I was looking at a few, and some of them were from. I think I picked up the 2-part Doom's Quest issues, which I'll talk about probably in another podcast as we go along. But I picked this up at PhillyCon at a vendor for $3, so that's pretty good. I think that's probably around the price it goes for online. It's really not that expensive. At most you should probably expect to pay maybe $5 or $6 for a high grade copy. It's not quite as much of an iconic issue as it would seem. A lot of times when people look at Iron Man, they look at Tales of Suspense 39, Iron Man 128, which is the Demon in a Bottle cover, which I own, thanks to the Students of S.H.I.E.L.D. So thank you guys for that. But not really a lot of iconic Iron Man covers, stick out. And this is, to me, this was one that I just had to have. And I'll show the panel. We'll probably be showing it right now. For this whole podcast, I'll probably be just showing the artwork from the issue. We'll just be panning through it. So, feel free to just, put this on and not watch the video if you don't want to. But I'll show the cover right here. You probably already saw it already, but the cover is just really great. I mean, it has Tony just stuck in the snow, and it's just an iconic cover to me, and it just has so much weight when you hear about what the story is actually going on behind it. So let me just look it up real quick. You'll have to excuse me. Not having a freaking not having the issue on me right now. I have it in my long box, but I just don't have it with me right here. So yeah, so you can just see just Tony in the snow, with the words behind him on the wall saying, "In the morning, Tony Stark will be sober or dead," and it's just a very dramatic cover, and very simplistic too. Like, I know a lot of people like the crazy covers. There's a bunch of stuff going on in it, but this is just, it's the perfect amount of simplistic stuff that you can that delivers the message as well. If you're not into, if you're actually, read this issue and you're like, holy crap, I really like this issue. Like, oh my god, like I want to read more of this stuff. Where can I get it? Well, you're in luck because I know about where that stuff can be collected. Um, this issue you can actually find in a thick trade paperback um, called Iron Man Duel of Iron Epic Collection. And the Epic Collection are, like I said before, just thick 20 issue trade paperbacks that Marvel's been putting out to collect material that hasn't been collected before. So, Duel of Iron collects, I want to say, like the second, like the probably like the second quarter of Denny O'Neil's run. So, and that would be like issues number 178 through 195, and Iron Man Annual Volume 1, number 6 to 7. So you're getting 178, which is like Rhodey already having the armor up until just before, about 5 issues before Ironmonger. So you're getting a lot of build up towards that event. So I'm hoping Marvel will eventually release another Epic Collection after this one that will collect the Ironmonger stuff that you can read in its entirety and kind of see the payoff from this issue and how it affects his stuff going forward. But um, so let's get into the story. So the first thing I would like to talk about, number one, is if you aren't a big Iron Man fan, that's fine. You don't really need to be a huge Iron Man fan to really understand this story. It's a very good standalone story itself, and it's also very like I think it's very inspiring and very like it'll make you want to go read the rest of Denny O'Neil's run. Oh, one more thing before I move on. The Duel of Iron Epic Collection collects number 178 to 195, but there also is another Epic Collection um, that comes before that called the Enemy Within Epic Collection, and that's also Iron Man, and you can collect that, and that is the beginning of Denny O'Neil's run. So you can get two Epic Collections back to back that have continuous issues of Denny O'Neil's run. So just keep that in mind if you decide if you want to read the whole thing. That's just an option I thought I'd give you. So yeah, so going back to this, it's a great standalone issue, and that's kind of why I picked it as my first podcast for my favorite issues, because it's just it's a good story just to pick up and read every once in a while and not really get lost too much in the continuity around it. Um, basically at this point, what happened was Tony relapsed into alcoholism again for reasons I can't explain. I think most likely, I think it had to do something. It had to do something with Obadiah Stane, and how he used like some chick to manipulate Tony into like going nuts and start drinking again. So Tony basically, and Tony's so drunk that he can't fight off these. Um, Tony can't fight off these people that are coming into his company. So eventually he gives the armor to Rhodey to defend the Stark International, I think, at that point. And that's in issue 170. So this is 12 issues after that. And basically Tony has just lost all hope. His company has gone under. It's been sold to Stain. So Tony really is basically just a homeless drunk walking around the streets. In the issues that build up to this number 182, you start to see it. You see more and more glimpses of Tony just wandering through the streets, spending his money all on alcohol, and the police being concerned about him, and some people just noticing, like, hey, is that Tony Stark over there? And I think there also was a panel from one issue before this where, I think Cap went to go see Tony, and Tony was like, help me, I need your help. And Cap was just like, like you have to help yourself, man. I can't help you with that. So, there's a lot of build up to this moment, and it's just very sad to see him go back after being lost, after recovering, back in issue 128, 129, around that time. So, um, like I said, his company was taken over by Stain. Bethany Cabe, who I've talked about in the top 5 Iron Man Volume 1 storylines podcast. Bethany Cabe was his personal bodyguard, and he really grew close to her. And obviously Tony has had a lot of flings in the past, but Bethany was one of his closest friends, and lovers at one point, and the whole drama with her husband and his like drug addiction and like all that stuff really brought him out of his first bout with alcoholism. So, but after she decided that she just needed to go back to her husband and leave Tony, that really left a big hole in his life and left him vulnerable for this alcoholism stuff to creep back into his life. Um, and like I said before, he doesn't have Rhodey anymore. Like Rhodey has taken over as Iron Man, and he has also enlisted the help of two workers from Stark International, the Irwin siblings, Cly and Morley, to start their own company called Circus Maximus. So they're kind of doing their own thing, and Tony's just basically left with nothing, no company, no lover, no friends. So he's just drifting throughout these 12 issues just drunk, and it's really sad to see a character like Iron Man just totally lost. And in the few issues before this, he was hanging out with this homeless chick called Gretel Anders, and you know the story of her really comes to an end here. She's actually pregnant with a child, and just to clarify, this baby is not Tony's baby. So, this baby is, I guess someone else's. It's not Tony's. So, I know the comment section will fire up and be like, well, Tony freaking, bang some chick. No, that's not true. Gretel Anders is just some homeless hoebag who had got pregnant for someone else, I guess. Anyway, so it's the dead of winter. The police are concerned. They're like, look, you can't. If you stay out here, you'll freeze to death. We can't have you out here all the time. And Tony's like, whatever. And I think he gets money from like the police or whatever. And then he goes and he gets alcohol or whatever. Meets up with Gretel again, and the storm just takes a turn for the worse. And Gretel starts having the baby, like right then and there, like in the winter and out in the cold, and they can't get to the hospital because they're in the storm. So instead, they go against like an abandoned building where Tony helps deliver the baby, um, and he holds the baby in his hands, and I'm pretty sure there's a panel or a page that has him holding the baby in his hands, and it's like all the stuff about living, and then the next day they find out that Gretel has passed away from frostbite and exposure. But shockingly and surprisingly, Timothy, the baby, survived the night, as well as Tony. Tony had, he barely survived, but he had heart damage and also has some major frostbite. But this whole event, like seeing like this baby become born and realizing how close Tony was to death, it was a real wake up call for his character, and in a lot of ways, this story, is very similar to the Demon in a Bottle storyline that David Michelinie and Bob Layton thought of about 50 issues ago. The thing is, though, this is it is a different take on the alcoholism issue, and I totally get it. It is a little lazy to rehash alcoholism again after 50 some issues or whatever. But in some ways, this story is very separate from um, the first story, Demon in a Bottle. In Demon in a Bottle, like all this stuff led up to Tony drinking, and it really wasn't like it didn't really come to a head. You didn't really notice it until like the last one or two issues of that storyline. But for this one, it's just it's just a total like you know he just gave up like for 12 issues, 13 issues, just gave up totally and was wandering the streets, and something as shocking as this just brought him back, and it's very like it's very like 360, and I guess that can be kind of like confusing to some people, but to me, I think it's very powerful to show like a character like that being so close to death, and getting that kick in the ass that he needed to go out there and take back what's his. I mean, and that's what makes this whole run very satisfying, is that you see that evolution of Tony from coming off of you know creating the space armor and the stealth armor and getting over alcoholism and fighting all these villains that have tried to take over his company, to being taken over by Stain and losing everything that is his name, but then having this triumphant return and, coming back with Rhodey and, you know, just taking back what's his. It's a very satisfying run, and I'm hoping one day this run gets collected into an omnibus because I think it truly deserves it. It's a very underrated run, and I think personally for me, I think this provides the most development for Tony's character. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I just sneezed. But yeah. Um, and like I said before, this is the start to the recovery. So, after Tony goes through this traumatic, experience, he starts looking to Rhodey to help him after he comes back. Rhodey came back from the Secret Wars event, which was back in the 80s. So, um, he looks to Rhodey to help him with that. Help him, trying to ask him, like, hey, can I join your company, Circus Maximus? And the four of them end up moving out to California to start this company. So, it's a good turning point for Tony's character to just leave behind all of the sadness that he had in New York and move on to California, where eventually he would, you know, make his own armor and then, you know, eventually be a mainstay for the West Coast Avengers. So it's a good transition for his character, and I think it's a second wind that most people weren't expecting. But the thing is, another thing that's great about it is that obviously with Tony coming back, saying that he's gonna ditch the bottle now this time. There is tension between Tony and Rhodey because Tony, like, he didn't say like, "Oh, I'll give you this armor and I'll help you figure it out." Like Tony was like, "I'm done. I'm gonna go drink. Here's the armor. You figure it out. I'm done. I'm not gonna help you. I'm not gonna do anything." So Rhodey really had to try to figure out how to do Iron Man and be Iron Man like all himself. So there is some tension there, and like Rhodey has not been too bad. Like he's had run-ins with the Mandarin, a bunch of other big Iron Man villains he's gone up against, and he hasn't done too shabby. So having Tony come back into the mix, obviously there's some tension there with Rhodey thinking that Tony might take the armor back. Um, but the thing is, as you start to see the issues past this issue 182, you start to see the confidence start to build in Tony. He starts tinkering again. He starts, um, communicating with the Avengers again. He starts establishing those connections again, and you know, it's definitely like tough for him. He doesn't know if going back to Iron Man is going to fix it because that's kind of what got him into this mess in the first place. So. But it's ultimately the most satisfying end to this arc that he has, facing off against Stain, after being a drunk for 13 issues. So, and that's pretty much it. I mean, you know, again, this is deals with alcoholism, and a lot of people put that tag on Tony with this story and all that stuff, but to be honest, this definitely is a really good story for Tony, and you know, like I said before, this is the pinnacle, like the breaking point of this run that just makes it that much more satisfying and really shows the lowest that his character has gone and how much he wanted to come back and be Iron Man again. So. Um, I'm curious to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think about this issue. I know we read this together, last semester. I want to say it was around like April of 2017. We read it together. So I'm curious to think what your thoughts are on this, and how this one issue really you know, represents Tony and how he struggles with alcoholism and the being sealed off from the world through Iron Man. So, yeah. So this has been Daniel with a My Favorite Issues podcast, episode 1. And this was Iron Man number 182, Deliverance. Let me know what you guys say in the comments below. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and Excelsior.